It started with a traffic stop that should have lasted 5 minutes. But when the officer approached the window, the woman inside didn't roll it down all the way. Her sunglasses stayed on. Her voice came sharp, entitled, "Do you know who my father is?" Her father, as it turned out, was the mayor, and she thought that meant the law didn't apply to her. What began as a routine citation turned into a scandal when she tried to intimidate the officer, threatened to make his career disappear, and later filed a harassment claim against the department. Within days, the story spread. The public demanded answers. And soon, the mayor's daughter found herself in a courtroom she couldn't charm her way out of. Sitting across from her was an experienced female judge, silver hair, black robe, calm authority that could slice through arrogance like glass. The kind of judge who'd seen every excuse, every manipulation, every tear weaponized for sympathy. The spoiled daughter arrived in designer heels and an attitude that said rules were optional. But by the end of the hearing, that same confidence would collapse under the weight of logic, evidence, and a judge who feared no name, no title, and no father's influence, because in this courtroom, justice doesn't care who raised you and only what you've done. And when the gavel fell, the mayor's daughter realized something no privilege could protect her from: accountability. The sound of her heels echoed through the marble corridor like a metronome of entitlement. Every click announced her presence, confident, calculated, and utterly unconcerned. Samantha Devereaux, daughter of Mayor Charles Devereaux, didn't walk into courtrooms to be judged. She walked into them to be admired. Her outfit alone told a story. A tailored white blazer, diamond studs, sunglasses perched on her head, though it was indoors. Every detail screamed control. But control was exactly what she was about to lose. The courtroom buzzed as reporters adjusted their cameras. The mayor's office had tried to downplay the case, calling it a misunderstanding, but everyone knew what it really was: a test of whether privilege could still buy immunity. At the defense table, Samantha smoothed her skirt and whispered to her attorney, Paul Renner, a man whose reputation was built on keeping the powerful untouchable. "Just make this go away," she said under her breath. "My father's already furious this even made it this far." Renner gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, Miss Devereaux. We'll be in and out. These cases don't last long when your last name is on the courthouse sign." But that assurance would vanish the moment the judge entered the room. The experienced female judge, silver hair, eyes sharp as glass, black robe perfectly pressed, and took her seat behind the bench. She didn't need to speak to command silence. Her presence did it for her. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Her nameplate read Honor Eleanor Grant. Those who knew her reputation understood one thing: you could lie, perform, or grandstand all you wanted, but logic would win. It always did. The bailiff called the session to order. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Grant surveyed the courtroom. She saw Samantha first. The expensive posture, the unearned confidence. The judge had seen her type 100 times before. People who confused privilege for intelligence and charm for truth. "You may be seated," she said. Her voice steady. She flipped open the file before her, glancing at the paperwork. Case number 2020-5417, City of Riverview versus Samantha Devereaux. Charges include obstruction, false reporting, and abuse of official influence. The words landed heavy in the air. Samantha crossed her legs and leaned back, whispering to her attorney. "Obstruction? That's ridiculous." "I told the truth," her lawyer whispered back. "Just let me handle it." But Judge Grant caught the exchange. "Miss Devereaux, this isn't a brunch table. Keep your comments for when you're called to speak." A flush crept up Samantha's neck. The courtroom chuckled softly before falling silent again. The prosecutor, David Morales, a young but sharp assistant district attorney, rose. "Your Honor, this case is about accountability. The defendant used her father's position as leverage to intimidate an officer performing his duty. When that failed, she filed a false complaint to protect her image. Today will show that no title, no parent, and no amount of privilege excuses that behavior." Renner rose, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, this is being blown out of proportion. My client is a respected community member and the victim of overzealous policing. The officer in question mishandled protocol and my client reacted out of fear. Not entitlement." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Fear? From what I've read, she threatened to have the officer fired." Renner smiled. "A misunderstanding, Your Honor. People say things in stressful moments." The judge's tone cooled. Then let's find out exactly what kind of stress leads someone to name-drop their father while resisting a citation. The first witness took the stand, Officer Daniel Reese, a seasoned patrolman with a calm, steady demeanor. "Officer Reese," said the prosecutor, "please describe what occurred on the evening of March 8th. He nodded. "I stopped a black convertible for running a red light near 5th Avenue. When I approached the vehicle, the driver, Miss Devereaux, refused to provide her license. She said, quote, 'You don't want to do this. My father signs your paycheck.'" A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. Samantha rolled her eyes dramatically, whispering, "He's exaggerating." Judge Grant's voice cut through the whispers. "Quiet, Miss Devereaux," Reese continued, unshaken. "When I asked her again, she lowered the window 2 inches and said, 'If you give me a ticket, I'll have my father call your chief.' I informed her that the stop was being recorded on my body cam. She responded, 'Then I'll make sure that footage disappears.'" The judge's pen paused mid-note. "Did she comply after that?" Morales asked. "No, she refused to step out of the vehicle and called her attorney instead." The prosecutor nodded. "Your Honor, may I play the footage?" Renner stood. "Objection." "The footage was taken out of context." "Overruled," said the judge. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. The courtroom watched the moment unfold. The stoplight, the sleek car, the lowered window. Then came Samantha's voice, dripping with disdain. "You don't know who you're talking to. This is a waste of my time. My father can have your badge." When the footage ended, silence swallowed the room. Judge Grant looked directly at Samantha. "Is that your voice?" She forced a tight smile. "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "No explanation needed," the judge interrupted. "The footage speaks louder than your attorney ever could." During recess, Samantha leaned toward Renner, her composure fracturing. "She hates me. You see how she's looking at me? She's made up her mind." Renner whispered back, "Calm down. The key is to humanize you. We'll make her believe you acted emotionally, not maliciously." Samantha sighed dramatically. "You think that woman understands emotion? She looks like she eats courtroom transcripts for breakfast." Renner lowered his voice. "That woman has ended careers with a single sentence. Watch your tone." Outside, cameras swarmed the hallway. Reporters shouted questions. "Miss Devereaux, do you think your father's position will influence the verdict? Do you regret threatening the officer?" She smirked into the lenses. "When this is over, you'll all owe me an apology." The arrogance made the evening news. When the session resumed, the judge's patience was visibly thinner. "Miss Devereaux," she began, "you're charged with obstructing an officer and filing a false report. This is not a popularity contest. This is a courtroom. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Samantha said, rolling her eyes just enough for the cameras to catch. "Good," the judge replied coolly. "Because your performance is being recorded for the record, not your social media followers." A ripple of laughter from the gallery. Samantha's face burned crimson. Renner stood quickly to redirect. "Your Honor, my client is a public figure. She's been under immense pressure and scrutiny. We ask for leniency and understanding. A single mistake shouldn't define her." The judge nodded. "You're right, Mr. Renner. A single mistake doesn't define anyone. But repeated arrogance often does." Samantha's jaw tightened. "Let's proceed," the judge said. The prosecution called the second witness, the city's internal affairs investigator. He testified that Samantha had filed an official complaint alleging harassment and unlawful detainment. But when investigators reviewed the footage, they found no misconduct. "Instead, they found threats. Hers. She fabricated details?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the investigator said. "The report claimed Officer Reese used profanity and brandished his weapon. The video shows no such behavior." The judge leaned forward. "So the complaint was not only false, it was malicious." "Yes, ma'am." "It appeared designed to discredit the officer," Samantha muttered under her breath. "He was rude to me first." "Speak up, Miss Devereaux," said Judge Grant, her tone sharp. "If you have something to say, own it." Samantha straightened. "He embarrassed me in public. I reacted emotionally." "Anyone would?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "No, Miss Devereaux. Not everyone threatens another person's livelihood when embarrassed. That's not emotion, and that's entitlement." The courtroom fell silent again. Samantha's attorney sank slightly in his chair. By mid-afternoon, the evidence was overwhelming. The video, the report, the phone records showing she'd contacted her father during the stop. The pattern was clear, but arrogance rarely surrenders quietly. When it was her turn to testify, Samantha put on her best performance. Her voice softened, her expression contrite, the victimized daughter routine perfected through years of charm. "I was scared," she said, eyes shimmering with feigned tears. "People recognize me because of my father. I've had strangers follow me before. When the officer pulled me over, I panicked. I only mentioned my dad because I didn't want things to escalate." The judge's eyebrow twitched. "And filing a false report, was that panic too?" Samantha hesitated. "I misunderstood what happened." Misunderstood or manipulated? She swallowed. "I never meant to hurt anyone." The judge let the silence stretch before replying. "Intent isn't measured by tears, Miss Devereaux. It's measured by truth." When court adjourned for the day, the crowd outside erupted again. Cameras flashed as Samantha exited beside her attorney. She waved, smiling as if she'd just left a fashion gala. Her father's motorcade waited at the curb. The mayor himself stepped out, red-faced, visibly angry. "What on earth were you thinking?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "Relax, Dad," she said, forcing a grin. "It's just optics. The judge will see reason," he exhaled sharply. "That woman is reason. Eleanor Grant doesn't bend for anyone. Not even me." Samantha's smile faltered for the first time. "You're exaggerating. Everyone bends eventually." The mayor looked at her with something close to fear. Not her. That night, social media lit up. Clips of Samantha's courtroom attitude went viral. Hashtags like Dumar Mayor-Daughter Meltdown and Justice for Rees trended across platforms. Her PR team scrambled, issuing statements about media misrepresentation. But the damage was done, and while she slept soundly in her penthouse suite, confident her family name would clean the mess, Judge Eleanor Grant sat in her office, reviewing every word of testimony. She'd seen powerful families before, those who used money to polish their wrongs into misunderstandings. But this case felt personal, not because of who Samantha was, but because of what she represented. A belief that laws were ornamental, reserved for others. The judge set down her pen and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, we find out if she can still hide behind her father's shadow." The next morning, the courthouse was electric. Lines of reporters stretched along the marble steps, microphones raised like weapons ready to capture every misstep. The mayor's daughter had become more than a defendant. She was a symbol. To some, she was the untouchable elite finally being challenged. To others, she was a misunderstood woman dragged into a public storm for one bad night. Inside, the tension felt heavier than the day before. The same experienced female judge sat at the bench, calm yet razor-sharp, her gavel resting like a quiet promise. Everyone in the room knew something was coming. The only one who didn't seem to sense it was Samantha Devereaux. She strutted in late. Again. A hush followed her as she took her seat. Designer sunglasses perched high on her head despite the court's no accessory policy. The bailiff shot her a warning glance, but she ignored it. To her, rules were for other people, people without her father's name. Judge Grant's eyes lifted, unamused. "Miss Devereaux," she said coolly, "you're aware court began 15 minutes ago?" Samantha shrugged. "Traffic, Your Honor, you know how the city is." The judge's pen stopped mid-note. "I see. Did traffic also prevent you from removing your sunglasses in a federal courtroom?" A few quiet laughs rippled through the gallery. Samantha smirked. "Their prescription. Then I trust they'll help you see the decorum required here," the judge replied evenly. "Take them off." Samantha froze, just long enough for everyone to feel her defiance, then slid them off with exaggerated slowness. And from that moment, everyone in the room knew. This wasn't just a trial. It was a showdown. The prosecution resumed its questioning. "Your Honor," said Morales, the prosecutor, "we've obtained new communication records relevant to the case. Text between the defendant and her father during the traffic stop." Samantha stiffened. Her lawyer whispered, "It's fine. They can't prove intent from messages." The prosecutor projected the messages on the screen. "Samantha, 8:47 p.m. He's pulling me over. Idiot doesn't know who I am. Mayor Devereaux, 8:47 p.m. Stay calm. Don't escalate. Samantha, 8:48 p.m. I'll handle it. He'll regret this." The courtroom buzzed. The judge leaned back slowly. So you informed your father before the alleged harassment occurred? Samantha's throat tightened. It wasn't like that. Then how was it, Miss Devereaux? Her attorney stood quickly. Objection badgering the witness. The judge's voice remained calm, but her gaze cut sharp. Overruled. I'm asking for clarification, not confession. Proceed, Miss Devereaux. Samantha hesitated, realizing every word could bury her deeper. I was frustrated. It wasn't meant as a threat. The judge's tone cooled another degree. Yet you followed through with a false complaint, attempting to destroy a man's career. Tell me, Miss Devereaux, when does frustration turn into calculated manipulation? Her silence answered for her. By mid-morning, the courtroom had transformed into a stage, and every spectator knew who the villain was. Morales continued. Your Honor, we also have testimony from a city clerk confirming that Miss Devereaux called the chief of police within an hour of the incident, requesting Officer Reese be reassigned. Renner objected again, but the judge waved him off. Let's hear it. The clerk, a nervous woman in her 30s, took the stand. Yes, Your Honor. She called my office around 9:30 p.m. demanding the officer's name and badge number. She said, quote, "Tell your chief to keep his people in line or the mayor will." The judge exhaled slowly, tapping her pen. Thank you. You may step down. Turning toward Samantha, her voice dropped an octave. Miss Devereaux, what part of that call reflected fear? Because from where I'm sitting it sounds an awful lot like entitlement. Samantha's cheeks flushed. I was angry. I felt disrespected. Being disrespected doesn't give you permission to abuse authority. The law doesn't bend to your feelings, Miss Devereaux. It applies equally, even to you. Her father shifted uncomfortably in the gallery. Even the mayor wasn't used to being reminded that equality doesn't come with conditions. When the court broke for lunch, Samantha stormed out before the cameras, her heels snapping against the floor like gunshots. This is a witch hunt, she shouted to the press. They're twisting everything I said. None of this would be happening if I wasn't the mayor's daughter. Inside the courthouse lobby, Judge Grant overheard the sound bites replaying on a journalist's tablet. She shook her head. Privilege always made the same mistake. It assumed exposure was persecution. Back in the courtroom, Renner pulled Samantha aside. Stop talking to the press, he hissed. You're making this worse. I'm making it worse, she snapped. They're humiliating me. That judge has it out for me. Renner rubbed his temples. No, she has it out for liars. There's a difference. Samantha crossed her arms. You work for me. You're supposed to defend me. I am, he said quietly. But I can't defend your attitude. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like that, without fear. It stung. And somewhere deep beneath her arrogance, she felt something foreign. Shame. The afternoon session began with the defense's witnesses, or what was left of them. Renner called an acquaintance of Samantha's, a socialite named Amber Lynn, who had been present at a nearby cafe during the incident. Miss Lynn, Renner began, you've known the defendant for years, correct? Yes. And would you describe her as volatile or threatening? Amber hesitated, glancing toward Samantha. No, she can be intense, but she's not violent. Did you witness the officer behaving inappropriately? Amber bit her lip. Not exactly. I mean, he raised his voice, but... The judge interjected. But, Amber sighed. Honestly, Your Honor, it looked like he was just doing his job. The courtroom went dead quiet. Samantha glared daggers at her friend. Amber shrank under the gaze, mumbling, I'm sorry, Sam. Renner closed his eyes. Their defense was unraveling. By late afternoon, the air felt heavier. The gallery leaned forward with each exchange, watching a dynasty crumble in real time. Then came the turning point. Mr. Renner, said the judge, you've painted your client as a victim of circumstance. But the evidence paints her as the aggressor. So before we proceed, I have one question for your client directly. Renner swallowed. Go ahead, Your Honor. Judge Grant's eyes locked on Samantha. Why did you file that report? Samantha hesitated. For the first time, her composure cracked. Because he embarrassed me. Embarrassed you, the judge repeated. You tried to destroy a man's livelihood because you didn't like how you were spoken to. Samantha's voice rose, defensive. You don't understand. Everyone treats me differently because of who my father is. I just wanted to be respected. The judge's tone didn't change, but her words cut like steel. Respect isn't inherited, Miss Devereaux. It's earned. usually by taking responsibility, not avoiding it. The crowd outside buzzed louder than ever. Pundits debated the trial live on TV. Clips replayed hourly, and by the time day 2 ended, Samantha's face had become the symbol of unchecked privilege meeting its match. That night, her father arrived at her penthouse unannounced. He looked older, the stress visible. Even Renner looked down, silently conceding that there was no saving this argument. The crowd outside buzzed louder than ever. Pundits debated the trial live on TV. Clips replayed hourly, and by the time day 2 ended, Samantha's face had become the symbol of unchecked privilege meeting its match. That night, her father arrived at her penthouse unannounced. He looked older, the stress visible in the deep lines around his eyes. "I just spoke with my advisors," he said. "The city's losing faith. They think I'm protecting you," she scoffed. "You are protecting me," he shook his head. "Not anymore, Sam. Not if it means losing everything I've worked for." Her voice sharpened. "You're choosing your image over your daughter?" "I'm choosing integrity," he said, his tone low but steady. "The thing you should have chosen, too." For the first time, she saw disappointment in his eyes. Not the kind that comes from anger, but the kind that says, "You've broken something I can't fix." He turned to leave. "Tomorrow you tell the truth. No more games." She watched him go, a lump forming in her throat. For the first time, the walls of privilege that had always shielded her began to feel like a cage. The next morning, Samantha arrived early. No sunglasses, no attitude. She sat quietly beside her lawyer, eyes fixed on the bench. When court began, she took the stand again, this time without coaching. "Without pretense, Your Honor," she began, her voice unsteady. "I lied. I wasn't harassed. I wasn't scared. I was angry I didn't get my way." The courtroom went still. Her father, seated behind her, closed his eyes, part sorrow, part relief. "I thought the rules didn't apply to me because of who I am. But I see now. That's exactly the problem." The judge said nothing at first, only studying her, searching for sincerity behind the words. Finally, she spoke. "Miss Devereaux, honesty doesn't erase wrongdoing, but it does reveal growth. The question is, do you understand what you've taken from others?" Tears welled in Samantha's eyes. "I tried to ruin someone's career because I couldn't handle being told no. I get it now." The judge nodded once. "Good. Then maybe this court hasn't failed you after all." The gavel struck once. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for judgment." As the courtroom emptied, Samantha sat alone, staring at her reflection in the polished table. For years she'd seen a woman of privilege, control, and beauty, but now she saw something rawer, someone learning finally what humility looked like. And across the hall, Judge Eleanor Grant closed her folder with quiet certainty. Tomorrow she would deliver more than a verdict. She would deliver a lesson, because justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, and for Samantha Devereaux, the transformation had only just begun. The courthouse was quieter that morning, eerily so. Gone were the swarm of reporters, the camera flashes, the whispers of scandal. What remained was the heavy anticipation of truth about to be decided. Samantha Devereaux sat at the defendant's table, her once pristine posture replaced by a still, reflective calm. The arrogance that had colored her every movement was gone. Even her father noticed it from the gallery. The absence of defiance, replaced by something unfamiliar. Humility. When Judge Eleanor Grant, the experienced female judge with silver hair and a face carved by years of moral clarity, entered the courtroom, everyone rose. The rustle of movement echoed like the start of a reckoning. "You may be seated," she said softly. Her tone carried neither anger nor pity, only gravity. She glanced down at the file before her, flipping through pages that now read like the anatomy of entitlement, the threats, the lies, the manipulation. Then she looked up at Samantha. "Miss Devereaux, before I issue judgment, do you wish to make a final statement?" Samantha rose slowly, hands trembling just enough to betray the fear beneath her resolve. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice, once sharp with confidence, was quiet but clear. "I came in here thinking this was all about image, about saving face. But I've realized that I wasn't trying to protect my name. I was trying to protect my ego. I disrespected an officer, lied to investigators, and used my father's position to avoid consequences. I did it because I thought the rules were for everyone but me. I was wrong." She paused, her gaze flicking toward her father. His eyes softened, not in forgiveness yet, but recognition. "I don't expect leniency," she continued, "but I do want to say sorry. To Officer Reese for trying to destroy what he worked for, to the court for wasting its time, and to my father for turning his name into a shield instead of earning one for myself." The judge's expression didn't change, but the faintest shift, a small imperceptible nod, hinted that she heard not just the words, but the truth inside them. The prosecutor rose next. "Your Honor," Morales said, "the state acknowledges Miss Devereaux's statement, but we cannot ignore the deliberate nature of her actions. The false report endangered an officer's reputation, wasted public resources, and undermined trust in our justice system. The state requests sentencing that reflects the seriousness of this abuse of power." Judge Grant folded her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Morales." Then she turned her gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Renner?" Renner stood, his voice respectful but firm. "Your Honor, my client's actions were indeed misguided, but she has shown genuine remorse. The transformation we've seen, from denial to accountability, is significant. I ask the court to consider her confession not as strategy, but as a step toward rehabilitation." The judge remained silent for a long moment, her eyes unfocused, as though she were weighing the moral gravity of the world itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, deliberate, and unmistakably final. "Miss Devereaux, I have presided over hundreds of cases, from hardened criminals to ordinary citizens who made terrible mistakes. But rarely have I seen someone so convinced that wealth and power could rewrite the rules of decency. You walked into this courtroom treating it like an inconvenience, certain that your father's name would protect you. You mocked this process, insulted this court, and lied under oath." The words were sharp but calm, like a scalpel cutting truth from illusion. She continued, "But in recent days I've also seen something else. I've seen a young woman stripped of arrogance, forced to face the one thing money can't buy, integrity." Samantha blinked, tears glistening but unshed. "Justice," the judge said, leaning forward slightly, "is not vengeance. It's accountability. And accountability isn't a punishment, it's a mirror. You've looked into that mirror for the first time, and I believe you didn't like what you saw. That is the beginning of change." The courtroom was silent. The air felt sacred. "I hereby find the defendant, Samantha Devereaux, guilty of obstruction of justice and filing a false report," the judge declared. "However, in recognition of her confession, cooperation, and genuine remorse, this court will sentence her to 6 months of community service with the City Integrity Office, along with mandatory public apology and restitution to Officer Reese for defamation damages." Gasps rippled through the gallery. It wasn't lenient, but it wasn't ruinous either. It was a sentence designed not to destroy, but to reform. The judge added, "In addition, Miss Devereaux will attend ethics counseling and deliver 3 public seminars on accountability and the misuse of privilege. You will stand before others like you, young people who think influence is immunity, and tell them what you learned here." Samantha nodded through quiet tears. "Yes, Your Honor." "Lastly," the judge said, her tone softening, "you will write a formal apology to Officer Reese, not for publicity, but for understanding. When a person abuses power, it's not just one person they hurt. It's everyone who still believes in fairness." Samantha nodded again, voice barely a whisper. "I will." The judge leaned back, closing the file. "Officer Reese," she said, turning to the witness bench, "you've shown dignity and restraint throughout this ordeal. This court thanks you for reminding us that decency isn't weakness, it's strength." Reese stood briefly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to do my job." The judge smiled faintly. "You did more than that, officer. You reminded a city that no one stands above the law." As he sat down, the audience applauded softly, a rare, spontaneous gesture in a courtroom usually defined by restraint. Judge Grant tapped her gavel once. "Court is adjourned." The sound reverberated through the room, not just an end, but a reckoning. Samantha stayed seated long after everyone else had left. Her father approached slowly, the echo of his footsteps filling the empty chamber. For the first time, he didn't look like the mayor, just a father who had watched his daughter finally grow up in the hardest way imaginable. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes red but steady. "I should have done it a long time ago," he nodded. "So should I." Maybe if I hadn't protected you from consequences all those years, you would have learned this sooner. There was pain in his voice, but also relief. I'll face it, she said. All of it, he smiled faintly. Then maybe there's hope for both of us. Outside, the press waited, but Samantha didn't rush toward the cameras this time. She didn't wave or smile. When they shouted questions, "Do you regret your actions? Was the verdict fair?" She simply said, "It was just." The word surprised even her. But as they left her lips, she realized she meant them. Across the courthouse plaza, Officer Reese was heading toward his patrol car. Their eyes met briefly, an awkward, silent acknowledgement between two people bound by one truth. Justice, when real, humbles everyone. Samantha walked past the reporters, past the headlines waiting to be written. The sun was breaking through a thin veil of clouds, warm and sharp, just like the lesson she'd learned under the judge's gaze. Later that night, Judge Grant sat alone in her chambers, the faint sound of rain against the window. She opened her case log and wrote one last note beside Samantha's name, not ruined, redeemed. Then she closed the folder, because for all her years on the bench, she knew one immutable truth. Justice isn't about crushing the guilty. It's about awakening the conscience of the lost. And that day, in her courtroom, conscience had finally spoken. The courtroom was empty now, but its echoes lingered, the memory of arguments, confessions, and that final gavel strike. Justice had been served, but what remained wasn't the sound of victory. It was the quiet weight of reflection. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had changed. But for Samantha Devereaux, everything had. Gone were the designer sunglasses, the smug headlines, the constant validation of privilege. In their place stood silence, humbling, raw, and clarifying. For the first time, she wasn't the mayor's daughter. She was simply a woman who had been wrong, and was learning to live with that truth. 3 months into her sentence, Samantha's morning started differently. No private chauffeur, no assistants. Just her and a worn-out city-issued vest that read, Community Service, City Integrity Office. Her first assignment, filing citizen complaints, the same kind of paperwork she once weaponized. She read stories of everyday people, ones who'd been ignored, brushed aside, dismissed. Each form felt like a mirror reflecting who she used to be. At first, she hated it. The smell of stale coffee, the flickering fluorescent lights, the constant reminders of her fall from grace. But then, something shifted. An older woman who worked beside her, Mrs. Lang, leaned over one afternoon. "You're that Devereaux girl, aren't you?" Samantha winced. "I was," Mrs. Lang chuckled softly. "Well, don't just sit there being was. You're still breathing, aren't you? Might as well make something out of it." The words landed deeper than she expected. For once, someone wasn't pitying her or attacking her. They were challenging her to do better, and so she did. The public apology came next, the hardest part of her sentence. The auditorium was packed. Reporters lined the walls. Her father sat in the front row, silent. Samantha approached the podium, palms clammy, camera lights burning into her face. "I used to think reputation was everything," she began, her voice low. "That as long as people respected my name, it didn't matter how I earned it. But respect isn't something you can inherit. It's something you build. And I tore mine apart." The room was dead silent. "I lied about an officer who was just doing his job. I tried to use power as a weapon. And I hurt people who didn't deserve it. There's no excuse for that, only accountability." She paused, taking a deep breath. "To Officer Reese, I'm sorry. To the people who trusted my father's office, I'm sorry. And to anyone who's ever thought they were above the law, let me be your reminder that you're not." When she stepped away from the podium, there were no cheers, no applause, just the sound of cameras clicking and a faint murmur of something she hadn't heard in months. Respect. Later that night, her father met her outside the venue. The air was crisp, the city lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement. "You handled that well," he said quietly. She shrugged. "I didn't handle it. I just told the truth," he smiled faintly. "That's handling it better than most politicians I know." They stood in silence for a while before he added, "You know, I was terrified this would ruin us. But I think maybe it saved us." Samantha looked at him. "Saved us from what?" "From believing we were untouchable," he said. "That's the most dangerous lie there is." For once, she didn't have a comeback. Just a quiet nod. Over the following weeks, Samantha kept her head down and her hands busy. The Integrity Office assigned her to help with a civic ethics outreach program. Schools, community centers, workshops. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. At first, the audiences eyed her skeptically. "That's the mayor's daughter," they'd whisper. "Didn't she?" But when she spoke, something happened. People listened, not because she was famous, but because she was honest. "I stood in a courtroom thinking my father's title could save me," she told one group of college students. "But the truth? It almost destroyed me. The day that judge looked me in the eye and told me respect is earned, that's the day I started growing up." Afterward, a student approached her. "You know," he said, "it takes guts to admit you were wrong." She smiled. "No, it takes consequences." Meanwhile, the city itself was changing. Judge Eleanor Grant's verdict had become something of a moral milestone, cited in lectures, discussed in council meetings, quoted on talk shows. "Justice doesn't bow to influence," she had said, and those words now hung in classrooms and city halls like a silent creed. Officer Reese, reinstated and promoted, received commendations for professionalism. When asked about the trial, he always gave the same answer: "I just did my job." But sometimes, when he passed the courthouse, he'd remember that day, the way arrogance had melted into humility, and feel quietly proud of what restraint can achieve. As for the mayor, he faced his own reckoning. The public demanded reform. Nepotism policies, ethics audits, transparency initiatives, all born out of one case that began with a simple traffic stop. And for the first time, Mayor Devereaux supported them all. He'd learned that leadership wasn't about protecting family, it was about protecting integrity. One late evening, months after the sentencing, Samantha received an unexpected letter. The envelope bore the court seal. Inside was a single handwritten note from Judge Grant. "Miss Devereaux, I don't often reach out to former defendants, but your follow-through has not gone unnoticed. Your actions since sentencing demonstrate the difference between regret and growth. The law corrected your behavior, but only you could correct your character. Keep choosing the harder truth." Hunter E. Grant Samantha sat with the letter for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something purer. Validation. She framed it and placed it on her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the day her life began again. By the end of her sentence, Samantha wasn't counting the days. She was measuring them, in lessons learned, in hours earned, in small, unglamorous victories. The last day of service came quietly. Mrs. Lang hugged her goodbye, whispering, "You did good, kid." "Thanks," Samantha said softly. "For not treating me like I was special." Mrs. Lang grinned. "You weren't, that's why you got better." That evening, Samantha returned to the courthouse one last time, not as a defendant, not as a symbol, but as a citizen. The courtroom was empty, the air still and familiar. She approached the bench, the place where everything had fallen apart and come together. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished wood. "I get it now," she whispered. "Respect isn't what people give you. It's what you give yourself when you finally stop running." And somewhere in the silence, she almost imagined the faint echo of Judge Grant's voice, calm, firm, eternal. Justice isn't about power. It's about principle. Months later, Samantha began working full-time at the Integrity Office. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Her public speaking led to youth programs, mentorships, and city-funded workshops on ethics and responsibility. Her story, once a scandal, became a case study in civic recovery, how accountability can build where arrogance once ruled. One evening, she was invited to speak at a law school panel. Sitting in the audience was Judge Eleanor Grant. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment both women shared something deeper than words: mutual respect. After the event, Samantha approached her. "Thank you," she said simply. The judge smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. You did the hard part." Samantha laughed softly. "You made sure I didn't forget to do it." The judge nodded, her silver hair catching the hallway light. "Then maybe we both did our jobs, and so life moved on. The city healed. The headlines faded. The spoiled mayor's daughter, who once believed the law was beneath her, became a reminder of what happens when justice stands its ground. and when a single voice of reason refuses to bend. Because, in the end, Judge Grant's courtroom wasn't just where Samantha's arrogance died. It was where her humanity was reborn.